I was sitting on my back porch in Richmond, Virginia, enjoying my morning coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against pavement with the kind of aggressive rhythm that could only mean one thing. Trouble was heading my way. Before I could even set down my mug, a woman in her mid-50s with a blonde bob haircut and a lime green pantsuit appeared around the corner of my house. Her face was already twisted into an expression of righteous indignation, and I knew immediately this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice shrill enough to startle the birds from the nearby oak tree. "Are you Yuri Volkov?" I stood up slowly, trying to maintain my composure. "That's me. Can I help you?" She marched right up to my porch, clutching a leather-bound notebook to her chest like it was some kind of holy text. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Riverside Oaks Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your generator situation immediately." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "My generator? What about it?" Patricia's eyes narrowed, and she flipped open her notebook with dramatic flair. According to HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 8, all generators must be approved by the board before installation. You never submitted an application, and frankly, the noise pollution is unacceptable. Mrs. Chen, 3 houses down, says she can hear it running at all hours. I felt my jaw tighten. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 5 years, and this was the first time anyone from the HOA had bothered me about anything. "Patricia, that generator is part of my home office setup. I work from home as a hospital systems engineer, and I need reliable backup power for the equipment I maintain remotely." "I don't care if you're running mission control for NASA," Patricia snapped. "Rules are rules. You have 48 hours to submit the proper paperwork, or I'll be forced to take action." Something about her tone made my blood boil. "What kind of action?" "Whatever is necessary to ensure compliance," she said, tilting her chin up. "This is a community, Mr. Volkov, not some lawless frontier where people can do whatever they please." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting angry wouldn't help. "Look, I'll review the bylaws and see what I need to do, but that generator isn't going anywhere. It's essential equipment." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there with a cold cup of coffee and a growing sense of dread. That evening, I pulled out the massive binder of HOA documents I'd been given when I bought the house. I'd barely glanced at it back then, too excited about finally owning a home to worry about the fine print. Now, as I flipped through page after page of regulations, I realized just how extensive the rules were. Everything from the exact shade of beige you could paint your house to the types of mailboxes permitted was spelled out in excruciating detail. Sure enough, there was a section on generators. According to the bylaws, any permanent generator installation required board approval, an environmental impact assessment, and approval from at least 60% of your immediate neighbors. The process could take up to 90 days. I sat back in my chair, running my hands through my hair. This was going to be a problem. My generator wasn't just some convenience. It was registered as part of the emergency backup system for Richmond Memorial Hospital. When I'd taken the job as their senior systems engineer 3 years ago, part of the arrangement was that I would maintain critical server access from home. The hospital had specific requirements about power redundancy, and they'd actually helped me install the generator to meet those standards. I picked up my phone and called my supervisor, Dr. Marcus Chen, the hospital's chief information officer. "Yuri, what's up?" Marcus answered, sounding tired. It had been a long week at the hospital. "I've got a situation with my HOA," I explained. "The president just showed up threatening me about my generator, Says I need approval and all this bureaucratic nonsense. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The generator that's registered to our emergency system. That's the one. Let me make a call, Marcus said. That generator is part of our disaster preparedness infrastructure. We have legal protections for essential medical equipment. I'll have our legal team send them a letter. Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it. Don't worry about it. We need you online when emergencies hit. Some HOA president isn't going to compromise patient care. I felt a little better after hanging up, but something told me Patricia Henderson wasn't the type to back down easily. 2 days later, I was in the middle of a video conference with the hospital's IT team when I heard loud voices outside. I muted myself and walked to the window, peering through the blinds. What I saw made my stomach drop. Patricia was standing in my driveway, and she wasn't alone. There were 2 police officers with her, and she was gesturing emphatically toward my house while talking to them. I could see the generator humming quietly on the side of my property, exactly where it had been for the past 3 years. I quickly wrapped up my meeting and headed outside. As I approached, I could hear Patricia's voice carrying across the yard. It's been running constantly for days, officers. The noise is unbearable and he's refused to comply with community regulations. One of the officers, a younger guy with a name tag that read Henderson, turned to me as I walked up. Sir, are you the homeowner? I am. Yuri Volkov. What's this about? The other officer, older with graying hair at his temples, consulted his notepad. We received a complaint about an illegal generator installation. Can you tell us about the unit? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. That generator is part of the emergency backup system for Richmond Memorial Hospital. I'm their senior systems engineer, and I maintain critical infrastructure from home. The generator ensures I can keep essential medical systems running during power outages. Patricia let out a derisive laugh. Oh, please. That's the most ridiculous excuse I've ever heard. You expect us to believe that a hospital depends on your backyard generator. The older officer held up a hand. Madam, let's let him explain. Sir, do you have documentation for this? I do. Give me just a minute. I jogged back inside and grabbed my work folder, which contained my employment contract, the generator registration paperwork, and the official letter from the hospital's legal team that had arrived just that morning. When I returned, I handed the documents to the officers. The older officer, whose name tag read Morrison, read through everything carefully. His expression shifted from skeptical to interested as he went through the pages. This appears to be legitimate. The generator is listed as part of the hospital's distributed emergency power system. Patricia snatched the papers from his hands before he could stop her. This is fake. He probably printed this himself. Madam, please return those documents, Officer Morrison said firmly. Those are official records. Patricia's face was turning red. You're not taking this seriously. He's violating HOA bylaws, and that's a civil matter that affects property values. I want him cited for noise violations at the very least. Officer Henderson had been quiet, but now he spoke up. We did a noise reading on the way in. The generator is operating at 42 decibels from the street. That's well below the city's noise ordinance threshold of 65 decibels during daytime hours. But the bylaws, Patricia sputtered. The HOA bylaws clearly state, HOA bylaws don't supersede city, state, or federal regulations, Officer Morrison interrupted. And they certainly don't override medical emergency infrastructure. Sir, your generator appears to be in full compliance with all applicable laws. I felt relief wash over me, but I could see Patricia's face turning an alarming shade of purple. This is outrageous, she shrieked. I'm the president of this HOA, and I will not be disrespected like this, If you won't do anything, I'll take matters into my own hands." Officer Morrison's expression hardened. "Madam, I'd strongly advise against that. If this equipment is damaged or tampered with, it could be considered destruction of medical emergency equipment, which is a felony." Patricia glared at all of us, clutching the documents so hard they were starting to crumple. "We'll see about that." She threw the papers at my feet and stormed off to her car, which was parked halfway up on my lawn. "Officers, thank you for your time," I said, picking up my documents. Officer Morrison handed me his card. "If she gives you any more trouble, call us directly. And you might want to consider getting a camera system installed. People get weird about HOA disputes." After the officers left, I stood in my driveway for a long moment, watching Patricia's car disappear down the street. Something about her final words made me uneasy. I took Officer Morrison's advice seriously and immediately ordered a security camera system that could be delivered and installed within 2 days. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I called my friend Derek, who lived 2 streets over and had been dealing with his own HOA drama about a vegetable garden. "Man, Patricia Henderson is a nightmare," Derek said when I told him what happened. "She tried to fine me $500 for growing tomatoes in my front yard. Said it violated the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. How did you handle it? Got a lawyer. Sent her a letter explaining that Virginia has right to farm laws that protect residential gardens. She backed off, but she still glares at me every time she drives by. I'm starting to think I might need a lawyer too. Probably not a bad idea. Hey, have you met any of the other people she's harassed? There's actually a whole group of us. We meet up sometimes to compare notes." This was news to me. "Really?" "Yeah. There's me, Sarah Wilkins, who got cited for having the wrong shade of shutters, Tom Bradley, who got threatened over a basketball hoop, and about 5 or 6 others. We've been talking about trying to vote her out at the next board election." "When's that?" "Not for another 6 months. But honestly, with the way she's escalating lately, I don't know if we can wait that long. She's gotten really aggressive about enforcement." We talked for a while longer, and Derek sent me a group chat link where the other homeowners shared their Patricia horror stories. Reading through them, I realized I'd actually gotten off easy so far. Patricia had tried to foreclose on Sarah's house over unpaid fines for having rose bushes that were supposedly the wrong color. Tom had been threatened with legal action because his daughter's chalk drawings on their driveway violated the clean appearance clause. The security cameras arrived on Thursday, and I spent Friday afternoon installing them. I positioned them to cover my driveway, the generator area, and both sides of my house. The system connected to my phone and would send me alerts if it detected motion. On Saturday morning at exactly 3 a.m., my phone started buzzing with motion alerts. I jerked awake, fumbling for the device in the dark. When I pulled up the camera feed, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Patricia Henderson was in my yard, and she had a pair of bolt cutters. She was dressed all in black, which would have been comical if the situation wasn't so serious. As I watched, she approached the generator and started examining the power connections. I immediately called 911 while simultaneously turning on my outdoor lights and activating the camera's audio system. "This is private property and you're being recorded," I announced through the camera's speaker. "The police have been called." Patricia jumped about a foot in the air, dropping the bolt cutters. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen in the lights like a deer. Then her expression shifted from shock to defiant. She picked up the bolt cutters and turned toward the camera. "This generator is a nuisance, and I'm removing the nuisance," she yelled. "You had your chance to comply. You're attempting to destroy registered medical emergency equipment," I shouted back, now standing at my back door. "That's a felony. I don't care. The HOA has authority here." She raised the bolt cutters toward one of the fuel lines. I ran outside without thinking, my only thought being that I had to stop her. If she damaged the generator, it could take days to repair, and we'd had severe weather warnings for the coming week. If the hospital lost power during a storm and I couldn't maintain the backup systems, people could die. "Get away from that," I yelled, running toward her. Patricia swung around with the bolt cutters, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might actually try to hit me with them. But then sirens wailed in the distance, getting rapidly closer. Red and blue lights flooded the street as 2 police cars pulled up. Officer Morrison was one of the responding officers, and his expression was grim as he took in the scene. Patricia still had the bolt cutters in her hands, and the cameras had recorded everything. "Madam, put down the tool and step away from the equipment," Officer Morrison ordered. "I'm well within my rights as HOA president," Patricia protested, but she did set down the bolt cutters. "This man is in violation of community bylaws, and when the proper authorities won't act, citizens must." "Madam, we've already explained that this equipment is legally installed and protected," Officer Morrison said. "You're on private property at 3 in the morning with tools that could be used for vandalism. That's criminal trespassing and attempted destruction of property." "It's attempted destruction of medical emergency equipment," I added, my voice shaking with adrenaline. "That generator is part of Richmond Memorial Hospital's emergency infrastructure." A female officer I didn't recognize stepped forward. "Madam, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." Patricia's eyes went wide. "You're arresting me for trying to enforce HOA regulations." "We're arresting you for criminal trespassing and attempted felony destruction of property," the officer said. "You have the right to remain silent." As they rid Patricia her rights and put her in handcuffs, she kept protesting, her voice getting increasingly shrill. Several neighbors had come outside to see what the commotion was about, and I saw them standing on their porches, watching as Patricia was loaded into the back of a police car. Officer Morrison took my statement and collected the footage from my security system. "This is pretty clear-cut," he said. "She's caught red-handed on camera. The district attorney will definitely want to prosecute this, especially given the medical emergency aspect." "What happens now?" I asked. "She'll be booked and arraigned. Given the severity of the charges, they might set bail pretty high." "You should probably contact your employer and let them know what happened, and you might want to get a restraining order." After the police left, I sat on my porch as the sun started to rise, trying to process what had just happened. My HOA president had just been arrested for trying to sabotage medical equipment in my backyard. It felt surreal. I called Marcus as soon as I figured he'd be awake, around 7 a.m. "You're kidding," he said after I explained the situation. "She actually tried to cut the fuel lines." "The cameras caught everything. She was arrested about 4 hours ago." "Okay, this is serious. I'm going to need you to come in Monday morning. We need to file a formal incident report, and legal is going to want all the documentation. This could have been catastrophic if she'd succeeded. We've got patients on life support systems that depend on our redundant power grid." The weight of that statement hit me hard. I'd been thinking about this as a property dispute, an annoying HOA situation that had gotten out of hand. But Patricia had nearly compromised the safety of people in the hospital's care. Patients who needed ventilators, dialysis, medication pumps. All of those systems were tied into the network that my home setup helped maintain. By Monday afternoon, I was sitting in a conference room at the hospital with Marcus, the hospital's legal team, and a representative from the Virginia Department of Health. They'd all reviewed the camera footage and the police reports. "Mr. Volkov, I want to be clear about something," said Jennifer Walsh, the lead hospital attorney. "What happened at your property wasn't just vandalism. Under Virginia Code Section 18.2-147, attempting to damage or destroy equipment that's part of a medical facility's emergency infrastructure is classified as a Class 4 felony. The penalty is 2 to 10 years in prison." I felt my stomach turn. I never wanted anyone to go to prison. I just wanted her to leave my generator alone. "I understand that," Jennifer said, her expression sympathetic. "But this isn't about what you want anymore. Once medical emergency systems are threatened, it becomes a public safety issue. The state has an interest in prosecuting this to the fullest extent." The health department representative, a stern-looking man named Robert Garrison, nodded. "We've already opened an investigation into the HOA's activities. If they've been harassing you about registered medical equipment, we need to know about any other violations they might have committed." Over the next week, things moved faster than I expected. Patricia made bail, which was set at $50,000, but the judge issued a restraining order keeping her at least 500 feet from my property. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters wanting to know about the HOA president who attacked hospital equipment. I declined most of the interview requests, but the story took on a life of its own. The headline, "HOA president arrested for endangering hospital patients," ran in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and the article detailed not just my situation, but started exposing other complaints against Patricia and the Riverside Oaks HOA board. Sarah Wilkins, the woman with the rose bushes, was quoted saying, "Patricia Henderson has been terrorizing this neighborhood for 3 years. She uses the HOA bylaws like a weapon to harass anyone she doesn't like. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her." The publicity had an unexpected effect. More homeowners came forward with complaints. It turned out Patricia had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, issuing fines without proper board votes, spending HOA funds on personal expenses, and selectively enforcing rules against people she didn't like while ignoring violations by her friends. Derek called me 2 weeks after Patricia's arrest. "You're not going to believe this. The state HOA regulatory board just launched a full audit of our association. They're looking at every financial transaction and every enforcement action for the past 5 years. Because of what happened with the generator. That's what started it, but apparently once they started digging, they found a lot of problems. Patricia's been embezzling HOA funds. She used association money to renovate her kitchen and took a vacation to Hawaii that she claimed was for a conference on community management." I whistled. "That's on top of the felony charges for the generator. Gets better. You know how she always claimed she had the backing of the whole board? Turns out she's been forging signatures on documents. The other board members didn't even know about half the enforcement actions she was taking in their names." The criminal case moved forward through the system. I had to testify at the preliminary hearing, where Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she was simply trying to enforce community standards and didn't understand the significance of the generator. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Torres, wasn't having it. "Your Honor, the defendant was explicitly told by police officers that this equipment was part of a hospital's emergency medical system. She was warned that tampering with it would be a felony. She then returned in the middle of the night with tools specifically designed to cut through metal and attempted to destroy that equipment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate criminal act. The judge agreed, and Patricia was bound over for trial. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the hospital's legal team made it clear they wanted this prosecuted fully. The potential risk to patients was too serious to let slide. While waiting for the trial, I learned more about how the hospital's distributed emergency system worked. Marcus walked me through it one day at the office. "We have generators here at the hospital, obviously," he explained, pointing to a diagram on his screen. "But we also have critical systems that are monitored and maintained remotely by staff at secure home installations. Your generator, and 3 others like it around the city, form a backup network. If our main systems fail, you and the other engineers can keep essential services running from your home setups until we can restore primary power." I knew it was important, but I didn't realize I was part of a whole network. Most people don't. It's not something we advertise for security reasons, but what Patricia tried to do could have compromised patient care during an emergency. That's why everyone's taking this so seriously. The trial took place on a hot day in August, about 4 months after the initial incident. The courthouse in downtown Richmond was packed with people from the neighborhood, many of them homeowners who'd had their own run-ins with Patricia. I sat in the witness box and told my story. From the first confrontation to the night, I caught her on camera trying to cut the generator's fuel lines. The prosecution played the security footage, and I watched the jury's faces as they saw Patricia, dressed in black, bolt cutters in hand, attempting to sabotage the equipment. "And you were aware that this generator was registered as medical emergency equipment?" Amanda Torres asked. "Yes. It's part of my employment contract with Richmond Memorial Hospital. The generator has to meet specific standards and be maintained according to hospital protocols. What would have happened if Miss Henderson had succeeded in disabling your generator? If we'd had a power failure at the hospital during a storm, which we've had several times in the past few years, I wouldn't have been able to maintain the backup systems for critical patient care equipment. Ventilators, dialysis machines, medication pumps, all of those systems depend on continuous power." Patricia's attorney tried to paint her as a well-meaning community volunteer who'd gotten overzealous about neighborhood standards, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the police testimony, the warnings she'd been given, all of it pointed to someone who knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. The embezzlement charges were filed separately, but references to them came up during the trial. The prosecution argued that Patricia had shown a pattern of putting her own desires above the law and the welfare of others. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Patricia Henderson guilty of attempted destruction of medical emergency equipment, criminal trespassing, and several related charges. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was stern. "Miss Henderson, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly. More seriously, you attempted to destroy equipment that protects the lives of hospital patients. Your actions could have had catastrophic consequences. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. You'll also be required to pay restitution to Mr. Volkov for his legal expenses and emotional distress, and to the hospital for the costs associated with this incident." Patricia's face was pale as they led her away. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that it was over, certainly, but also a strange sadness. This woman had destroyed her own life over a generator, over a need to control and dominate her neighbors. The fallout continued for months after the trial. The HOA audit revealed that Patricia had stolen more than $80,000 in association funds over 3 years. Her husband filed for divorce. The remaining HOA board members resigned, and new elections were held. Derek was elected as the new HOA president, running on a platform of reasonable enforcement and community cooperation rather than intimidation. One of his first acts was to review and overturn hundreds of bogus fines that Patricia had issued, including the one against Sarah Wilkins for her rose bushes. "We're going back to basics," Derek announced at the first community meeting under the new board. "The HOA exists to maintain property values and help the neighborhood, not to harass homeowners over petty nonsense. If something's actually a problem, we'll address it like adults, through conversation and cooperation." The meeting room erupted in applause. It felt like the whole neighborhood was breathing a collective sigh of relief. I kept working from home, maintaining the hospital's emergency systems without any further interference. My generator hummed quietly through storms and power outages, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Several times over the next year, during severe weather, that generator kept critical systems running while the main power was out. Marcus called me after a particularly bad storm that knocked out power across half of Richmond. "Your system kept the pediatric ICU monitoring online for 6 hours until we could get the main generators fully operational. You probably helped save 3 or 4 lives tonight. That made everything worth it." All the stress, the confrontations, the trial, all of it faded into background noise compared to knowing that the equipment I maintained helped protect people when they were most vulnerable. A year after Patricia's conviction, I got a letter from her. She was writing from prison, and the tone was very different from the aggressive woman who'd showed up on my porch that first morning. "Mr. Volkov, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I got so caught up in being in charge and enforcing rules that I lost sight of what really mattered. I convinced myself that I was protecting the neighborhood, but really, I was just feeding my own ego. What I did was wrong, and I'm grateful that no one was actually hurt because of my actions. I hope you can forgive me someday, though I understand if you can't. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson." I read the letter several times, trying to decide how I felt about it. Eventually, I wrote back a short note saying that I accepted her apology and hoped she'd use her time in prison to genuinely reflect and change. I didn't know if she was sincere or not, but holding on to anger wasn't going to help anyone. The Riverside Oaks HOA became a completely different organization under Derek's leadership. They updated the bylaws to include clear appeals processes, limited the president's unilateral authority, and established transparent financial reporting. The neighborhood Facebook group, which had been a constant stream of complaints and threats under Patricia's regime, became a place where people actually helped each other and shared community information. 2 years after the initial incident, I was sitting on that same back porch where this all started, drinking my morning coffee and listening to the generator's quiet hum. Sarah Wilkins walked by with her dog and waved. "Morning, Yuri. How's the hospital work going?" "Good, thanks." "How are your roses doing?" "Beautiful this year. You should come by and see them sometime." "I will." It was such a normal, pleasant exchange, the kind of interaction that should have been standard in a neighborhood all along. It struck me how much damage one person could do when they let power go to their heads, and how much better things could be when people actually tried to work together. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Power just went out at the hospital. Storms moving in. Your system ready." I checked my monitoring dashboard. The generator had automatically kicked on when it detected the hospital's power fluctuation, and all systems were green. "All systems operational. I've got you covered." "Thanks, Yuri. You're a lifesaver. I smiled, setting down my phone. That generator, the piece of equipment that had caused so much trouble, was humming away like always, doing its job quietly and efficiently. It had never been about noise or property values or HOA bylaws. It had always been about keeping people safe, about maintaining the systems that protected the most vulnerable members of our community. Patricia Henderson had seen it as a threat to her authority, something to be controlled or destroyed. She'd been so focused on her petty power that she'd nearly committed an act that could have killed people. The irony was that if she'd just left it alone, if she'd asked reasonable questions and listened to reasonable answers, none of this would have happened. She'd still be HOA president, still living her life, instead of sitting in a prison cell. The storm rolled in that afternoon. Heavy rain and lightning that knocked out power to thousands of homes across Richmond. My generator kept running, and I kept the hospital's backup systems operational throughout the outage. When the power came back on 6 hours later, I got a group email from the hospital administration thanking the emergency response team for maintaining critical operations during the storm. That evening, Derek called. "Hey, the new board wanted me to ask you something. We're thinking about setting up an emergency preparedness program for the neighborhood. You know, generators, backup power, that kind of thing. Would you be willing to consult on it?" "Sure. What did you have in mind?" "Well, we've got a lot of elderly residents and people with medical needs. What if we could create a network of homes with backup power that could serve as neighborhood emergency centers during outages? We could provide charging stations, heating and cooling, that kind of thing." It was a genuinely good idea. I like it. That's exactly the kind of thing an HOA should be doing, helping the community prepare for real problems. That's what we thought. Plus, after everything that happened with your generator, we figured it was time to be proactive about this stuff, instead of reactive. We talked for a while about the logistics, and I agreed to present a proposal at the next board meeting. It felt good to be working with the HOA instead of fighting against it, to be part of building something positive instead of defending myself against baseless attacks. 3 years after Patricia's arrest, I attended a community event in the neighborhood park. The new HOA had organized a block party, a celebration of community with food trucks, music, and activities for kids. It was nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering and enjoying each other's company. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers alongside Derek, when Tom Bradley came over with his daughter. She was probably 10 years old now, and she was carrying a basketball. "Mr. Volkov, my dad says you're the reason we got to keep our basketball hoop," she said. I smiled. "Your dad stood up for himself. I just happened to be dealing with the same person at the same time." "Well, thank you anyway, and thanks for the generator stuff. My grandma has an oxygen machine, and Dad says your generator helped keep the hospital working when she was there last year." That connection hit me harder than I expected. This kid's grandmother, someone I'd never met, had benefited from the same system I'd fought to protect. That's what it had all been about. Not property rights or HOA bylaws, but real people with real needs. "You're welcome," I said, my voice a little thick. "Tell your grandma I'm glad she's doing well." As the sun set over the park and the string lights came on, I looked around at my neighbors. These were good people, folks who just wanted to live their lives in peace and be part of a supportive community. Patricia Henderson had tried to turn the HOA into a tool for control and intimidation, but in the end, the community had rejected that approach and chosen something better. My generator was still running back at my house, quietly doing its job, ready to kick in whenever the hospital needed it. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones that happen in the background, the steady, reliable work that nobody notices until something goes wrong. The next morning, I got an email from the Virginia Department of Health. They'd completed their investigation into the incident and were issuing new guidelines for protecting medical emergency infrastructure at residential locations. My case was cited as an example of why these protections were necessary, and they were recommending stricter penalties for anyone who attempted to interfere with such equipment. I forwarded the email to Jennifer Walsh at the hospital's legal department. She called me an hour later. "This is significant, Yuri. These new guidelines are going to protect other healthcare workers who maintain remote emergency systems. Your case literally changed policy at the state level. I never set out to change anything. I just wanted to keep my generator." That's how a lot of important changes start. Someone stands up for what's right in their own situation, and it ripples outward. After we hung up, I thought about that. Patricia Henderson had tried to use her small amount of power to make my life difficult, to force me to comply with her interpretation of the rules. Instead, she'd ended up in prison, and the system she'd tried to weaponize had been reformed. Meanwhile, the generator she'd tried to destroy was still protecting patients, and now there were new laws to prevent anyone else from attempting something similar. 4 years after the initial incident, Patricia Henderson was released on parole. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine. She'd moved out of state, gone to live with relatives somewhere in North Carolina. Part of her parole conditions was that she couldn't serve on any HOA board or similar organization for 10 years. I never saw her again, and I was okay with that. I'd moved on, and hopefully she had too. The whole experience had taught me that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. If I'd backed down when Patricia first confronted me, if I'd disabled the generator to keep the peace, it would have compromised the hospital's emergency systems and potentially put lives at risk. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the reformed HOA. Property values actually went up, which was ironic considering Patricia had always claimed her strict enforcement was necessary to protect those values. Turns out people wanted to live in a community where the HOA was reasonable and helpful, not tyrannical and petty. My generator kept running through storms and outages, a steady presence that I'd long since stopped noticing in my daily life. It was just there, doing its job, exactly as it should be. Several other hospital employees in the area had installed similar systems, and we'd created our own informal support network to maintain the equipment and share best practices. 5 years to the day after Patricia had first showed up on my porch, I was promoted to Director of Emergency Systems at Richmond Memorial Hospital. The promotion came with a raise, more responsibility, and a commendation for my work maintaining critical infrastructure during emergencies. At the celebration lunch, Marcus raised his glass. "To Yuri, who literally stood his ground when someone tried to tear down the systems we all depend on. You showed us that sometimes protecting what matters means fighting battles you never expected to fight." Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some petty dispute, but because I'd helped protect something truly important. The generator in my backyard wasn't just a piece of equipment anymore. It was a symbol of the responsibility we all have to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it seems easier to just give in. That evening, I stood on my back porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the familiar hum of the generator and watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Somewhere in the hospital, patients were being cared for, their lives supported by systems that my equipment helped maintain. Somewhere in the neighborhood, families were living their lives without fear of harassment from an overreaching HOA. And somewhere out there, maybe Patricia Henderson was living a quieter life, one where she'd learned that real power comes from helping people, not controlling them. The generator hummed on, steady and reliable, a quiet guardian doing essential work without fanfare or recognition. That was fine with me. The best work often happened that way, in the background, unnoticed until the moment it was desperately needed. And when that moment came, as it had many times over the years, the generator was ready. I thought about writing a book about the whole experience, but decided against it. Some stories were better lived than told, better understood through their outcomes than their drama. The real story wasn't about HOA conflicts or legal battles. It was about the importance of standing firm on principle, about protecting systems that protected others, and about communities learning to function through cooperation rather than coercion. As darkness fell and the lights came on in houses across the neighborhood, I felt genuinely content. My home, my work, my community, they'd all been tested by conflict and come through stronger. The generator that had caused so much trouble had become a quiet symbol of resilience and purpose. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd monitor systems, respond to alerts, maintain equipment, and do all the ordinary tasks that kept extraordinary systems running. And my generator would keep humming in the background, ready for whatever came next. That was enough. That was everything.